He's obsessed with this issue of Canada.
China and Russia are working together, and there is now military cooperation and exercises happening in the Arctic, and we need to do more.
The Canadian Arctic is under threat.
NATO has to play a bigger role also in the protection of the Arctic.
This thing about Greenland, Panama, and you have to look at it whole cloth. This is about hemispheric defense and what this market means to the world and what this market means to the citizens in this market.
In the fall of 2022, the Canadian military found and retrieved Chinese monitoring buoys in the Arctic. And last summer, a Canadian warship on an Arctic patrol encountered a Chinese polar vessel in the Bering Strait off Alaska. Despite its borders being 1,500 kilometers from the Arctic Circle, China now considers itself to be a, quote, near Arctic state.
Don't doubt for a second that the man himself is quite frankly very obsessed with this. And if you look at the strategy and the economics of it, it's so compelling. He's not going to get off this. He's going to get engaged with whoever your government is, and there will be a process going forward. Now, what's the ultimate outcome of that process? That's not my line of country.
Russia continues to modernize and build up its military presence in their Arctic, investing in new bases and infrastructure. It also possesses a robust Arctic naval presence with submarine surface combatants and an icebreaker fleet much larger than those of other Arctic powers.
Is Donald Trump serious about the 51st state? In this video, The Sun political columnist Brian Lilley talks with Steve Bannon, former advisor to President Donald Trump. Bannon explains the importance of Canada to Trump and how it ties in with the Panama Canal and Greenland. President Trump has expressed concerns over Canada's role in Arctic security. With China and Russia expanding their presence in the Arctic, Trump has emphasized the need for stronger North American defense. Viewing Canada's vast Arctic territory, covering 40% of the region and over 70% of its coastline, as strategically essential. Canada's control over key Arctic waterways and resources makes it indispensable in any US-led Arctic security strategy. Trump has constantly criticized Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's approach to defense spending and sovereignty enforcement, suggesting Canada is not doing enough to secure its own northern frontiers. While annexation might not present a realistic scenario, increasing US pressure for Canada to bolster its Arctic military presence and potentially deepen defense integration with the US is likely to continue under Trump's vision for countering Chinese and Russian threats.
What President Trump laid out in what I call the Panama to Greenland is kind of Alfred Mahan's naval strategy to say he's going to look at hemispheric defense, kind of Monroe Doctrine 2.0. And that's going to be from taking back the Panama Canal to make sure the Chinese Navy and the Russian Navy can never hook up in the Caribbean, all the way up to Greenland. And remember, Greenland, if you control Greenland or in partnership with a free Greenland and have bases there like we've had in World War II, there it was to keep the sea lanes open. Here is to close the sea lanes against Russian fast attack and ballistic missile submarines coming out of the Arctic, out of both Murmansk and Archangel. If you control that sea lane between Greenland and Iceland, which the United States will do, and not just have tracking sonobuoys, but actually control it with naval forces, and you control the Panama Canal, you've essentially hermetically sealed the United States from attack by the Soviets, by the Russians. If you add then Canada geostrategically, because the new great game of the 21st century is going to be the Arctic. It's already a great power struggle between the Chinese Communist Party and the Russians up there. Canada's former most secure border, your northern provinces, are now your soft underbelly.
It is a region that is under challenge from both a sovereignty and a security point of view.
Canada's Victoria-class submarines, bought nearly 3 decades ago secondhand from the UK, are near the end of their service life.
And so what President Trump is saying is that if you look at the entire picture, everywhere from the 3 island chains in the Pacific, that would just guarantee that the Pacific became a natural barrier for Canada, coupled with what's happening in the Arctic and what the United States is going to do, coupled with Greenland and this hemispheric defense. There's such a compelling logic on both geostrategically and geoeconomically when you look at the combination of the markets. This is what President Trump, I think, is talking about tariffs. If you look at particularly your Western provinces, for people in Canada, the Western provinces of Canada are not that much different than Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, Oklahoma, Texas. It's that Western frontier mentality with the same kind of natural resources, both agriculture and natural resources and oil and gas. So there's so many compelling logic, and President Trump's laying it out there. Don't look at Canada separate from Greenland and from Panama because it's of a whole piece. The Canadians, too, on your defense budget, and particularly NATO. He said today with NATO that, and this goes for Canada, he says, hey, no offense, we bailed you out in World War I. We bailed you out in World War II. We bailed you out in the Cold War. You're just not a priority anymore. And the Russian army is kind of your problem. We'll still be there, but it's not vital national security interests. And the Canadian people, I think, have to have a deep conversation with themselves about the direction of the 21st century. Canada's been a tremendous ally of the United States, but they've been a better ally of Britain and Europe. Look at the blood sacrificed by the Canadian people in World War I. People never talk about it, but on D-Day, look at the sacrifice of the Canadian forces at the tip of the spear on D-Day and then going through Normandy and the breakout to Paris. Canada has shed more blood per capita than probably any democracy in the West in pursuit of freedom. The bravery and courage of the Canadian people can't be questioned. It's unbelievable what you guys have done. But I think now you got to think about what was that all for? Tremendous sacrifice. Look at everything that happened early on when the American volunteers went up to Canada to become part of the Royal Air Force to fight the Nazis in the early days. Canada, more as much as the United States, has sacrificed more for old Europe, as Churchill said. I think Churchill actually said it in Canada, that the new world was coming to the defense of the old world. Well, look, after doing it for a century, the New World's saying, look, we have our own strategic concerns, particularly with the Chinese Communist Party. And please, in Canada, remember, the greatest vulnerability we have now is the Arctic. Okay, that's where it all comes together. It's a great power struggle. And President Trump is bound and determined to secure the United States from that. And that's why I think Canada's a central part.
This gigantic area of our country makes up 40% of our landmass and 75% of our coastline. 140,000 Canadians call it home, spread across 72 communities.
President Trump is not trolling people in this. I have people call me all day long. Is President Trump just trolling?
Do you think Trump is trolling Canada? Steve Bannon doesn't think so.
This is serious. President Trump could, I think of everything we're working on, that President Trump's working on, I think this hemispheric defense, which is Panama, it's also Latin America, with Bolsonaro and with Milei and getting the Chinese Communist Party out of the Amazon. But this part from Panama to the security of all of it with Greenland and Canada, the Arctic, coupled with getting out 10 million or 12 million illegal alien invaders that were able to come through our country through the southern border. He is not trolling the Canadians. He's certainly not trolling your prime minister, who he refers to as your governor. If you also look at the Chinese Communist Party, unrestricted warfare, the Chinese Communist Party has been at war with the United States since May of 1989. But Xi said it, the People's War. They're doing it through cyber. They're doing it through political warfare. They're doing it through information warfare. As badly as we're infiltrated, Canada's actually worse. And Trudeau's exacerbated this. This is something the Canadian people got to wake up to. You're losing your sovereignty as you speak. That's why your crisis on your northern border. The irony in Canada, given everything through valor of arms and courage that you've defended, now what was always strategically your greatest, the thing you had greatest, which was your northern border and kind of the Arctic, now becomes your greatest exposure to actual losing territorial integrity and sovereignty, the Chinese Communist Party, which has already infiltrated Canada. Look at Huawei. Look at all the situations in Canada. They're at war just because, remember, in Chinese Communist Party doctrine, if they have to start shooting, like Sun Tzu, if they have to start shooting, they think the kinetic part, which has already started in Europe and Ukraine, the kinetic part of the war is where they don't want to take on the foreign devils, right? Because the foreign devils know how to man up and know how to fight. What they want to do is unrestricted warfare, is defeat the West even before any guns are fired. And they're quite far advanced in the United States, and I would argue they're farther advanced in Canada. People sit there and go, well, we're not really at war. That's like people in Europe in 1930, in the summer of 1939, sitting there going, we're actually not at war. It's a beautiful summer here. And the clouds of war were all over them. They just couldn't see over the horizon.
China's interests align with economic and military expansion. Its investments in Arctic infrastructure, often under the guise of research, raise security concerns. With Russia militarizing its Arctic presence and deepening ties with Beijing, Canada and the US face growing pressure to counter foreign influence in the region.
That includes them controlling it and controlling the territory of northern Canada. This is not just something that came to President Trump out of nowhere. This is the aggressiveness of the Chinese Communist Party in the Arctic, geostrategically and for resources. As a wake-up call, when they say the Arctic, they just don't mean the polar cap. They mean coming down, and you're going to lose. It's just quite simple. You're a Dominion nation. But kid, in your alliance in the Dominion, is NATO going to come and help you? Is NATO that won't pay for themselves? Are they going to come and help you in the Arctic? The territorial integrity and sovereignty of Canada is going to be tested and lost in the northern provinces and around Canada. And he said it on a state visit. This was 14 years ago. And they've been laboring away long before then, but they've been laboring away, since then. And they're a major Arctic power.
In December 2009, Prime Minister Stephen Harper met with Chinese President Hu Jintao in Beijing. Canadian Conservative Prime Minister made it clear to Beijing that Canada will not relinquish its sovereignty over its Arctic territory. As global interest in the region grows due to melting ice, new shipping routes, and untapped resources, China, eager to access these opportunities, has sought observer status in the Arctic Council and established ties with Iceland for potential deep-sea ports. When questioned by a Chinese reporter during his northern tour, Harper reaffirmed that vast areas of land and territorial waters in the Arctic belong to sovereign nations, including Canada, and that his government will assert control while working within international frameworks like the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. While Canada supports cooperative development and peaceful transit through the Arctic, it insists on regulating passage through the Northwest Passage to prevent environmental harm and illegal activities, an issue of particular concern as China seeks greater access to the region's strategic waters.
Just continue to watch President Trump. And one thing, he's not trolling. And this is why I think when he talks about this, he talks about the geoeconomics of it, he talks about the geostrategic nature of it. You should spend time understanding what it means about Panama to Greenland, what it means about the real threat to the Canadian people, what it means about, this is a naval strategy. This is essentially take the Western Hemisphere, which is an island. It's a relatively small island off of the Eurasian landmass, which is the main, if you look at Earth's globe, you have a massive landmass, Eurasia and with Africa. Then you have a relatively small, compared to that island off that is the Western Hemisphere. You have a Pacific Ocean that is, the Pacific is almost like a huge ocean desert. What the president is proposing is really a naval strategy of the three island chains in the Pacific, with the Pacific Ocean also protecting us, in Atlantic Ocean, where the United States Navy and potentially the Canadian Navy basically shut in the Russian fast attack and ballistic missile submarines in the Arctic, or that we can follow them wherever they go. We've controlled the Panama Canal, so there's no possibility the Chinese Navy, which is huge, teaming up with the Russian Navy in the Caribbean, essentially sealed off the hemisphere of North America. Then you look at what President Trump's talking about in an Iron Dome as some sort of anti-ballistic missile sort of apparatus, of which Canada would participate in.
Is Arctic security the main reason Trump envisions Canada as the 51st state? With China and Russia increasing their presence in the Arctic, do you see this as a significant threat to US and Canada's sovereignty and security?
Unlike the sacrifice we had in the 20th century, which did not, remember, it did not save us from the problems in Europe. We then had to go back and win the Cold War. And quite frankly, they've come back in Ukraine. And so Europe as a cockpit these conflicts is not going to go away. But that's a European problem, and the Russian army is a European problem. It's not an American. It's not a Canadian problem. I think what the Canadian people would do is, number one, take this seriously, follow what President Trump's saying, and I think get it on your national agenda and start having talk shows and conferences. People are to be debating this.
Thanks for watching. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic.